Thanks very much. It's a pleasure to be here. This presentation is very much focused on our current Queensland operations, and so I'll whiz through that and obviously welcome any questions at the end. Next slide, thanks. So here's the macro overview for natural gas just now. Really three separate themes that are relevant to the Queensland operations. Firstly, the desired energy transition is very, very hard. Getting to net zero by 2050 is going to be really, really tough, and gas is not an optional part of that journey. It's a necessary part, and all credible forecasts indicate demand should in fact grow over that horizon. Now, liquefied natural gas that's exported from Australia in various locations, including Queensland, where we are. A recent forecast from Shell indicated that demand here should also rise, particularly in Asia. And Australian security of supply is valued in particular by our allies such as Japan and South Korea. On the east coast of Australia, a gas supply crisis is imminent. Government actions have arguably made things worse. What that means is that current prices are probably more than $12 a gigajoule, and that's expected to be a long-term floor. Next slide. So we're in the Taroom Trough. That's a deep part of the Bowen Basin. The Bowen Basin is a massive Permian-era basin that has delivered for Australia over many, many decades. It has some of the world's best coking coal, some of the world's best coal seam gas, and as we go deeper, we believe it could have some of the world's best tight gas. The Taroom Trough is deep. We're about 4,000 meters here. There's known to be an awful lot of gas here. The challenge is getting it out. We're immediately adjacent to infrastructure. The Wallumbilla Gas Hub is Australia's premier commercial and infrastructure hub for gas. It connects to the export plants in Gladstone and to the southern markets. So accordingly, pipeline costs are minimal compared to competitors that are further away. And as an active oil and gas province for many, many years, arguably 100 years, there's community acceptance of what we do. And the onshore service sector is effectively immediately adjacent and can be accessed within hours rather than days or weeks. Thanks. Next slide. So Gladstone LNG plants were constructed and they were never quite full. And indeed now the coal seam gas fields which supply those have arguably peaked and are in decline. And we have a graph here commissioned from an industry expert that shows that decline will rapidly accelerate. Now, brownfield economics means that these plants should be supplied in priority to developing greenfields plants elsewhere in the world. So various operators, including us, but including much larger parties, are now targeting such opportunities. Thanks. Next slide. So here's a map of our area. We're calling it an energy super basin. That's a concept developed by Wood Mackenzie. This is where big money wants to go. It's where not only petroleum exists, but also carbon capture and storage and renewables. There's substantial renewable investment in the area, and that's likely to grow. Carbon capture and storage in Queensland centered on this area. And last year, we were pleased to do a deal with Origin Energy, whereby they contributed towards our well costs in exchange for data obtained for CCS. So the key is to reinforce that we are where big money wants to go. Thanks. Next slide. So there's a lot of energy infrastructure here. It's not a remote location. There are pipelines. There are significant electricity transmission lines. There are multiple existing gas-fired power stations supplied by the now peaking coal seam gas fields. There are new gas-fired power stations planned, such as at Cogan Creek. And indeed, the growing renewables in Queensland will require more and more gas power stations, particularly as people realize that pumped storage is expensive, difficult, and environmentally challenging. Next slide. So going back to my key points, if you're a junior in a capital-intensive industry like gas, you want to be where big money is going to want to go. And the best source of big money is big companies. This is a favorable location. Now, why? Big companies are already there. Shell is our immediate neighbor. They're drilling just now. Big companies go where others are. It's lower risk from their point of view. Natural gas is a bit of CO2 typically in its raw contents, and CO2 here is low. That is vital for big companies to be interested. Big companies go where there are big plays. This is material. There's many trillions of cubic feet of gas in place here, and money can be deployed into hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars. Sovereign risk is low. Queensland's obviously one of the best places in Australia, and Australia notwithstanding its federal faults from time to time, is still one of the best places in the world. Now, as an onshore unconventional play, investments can be toggled up and down. This is not a $5 billion FID Gulf of Mexico type play. It's got flexibility. Next slide. So multiple operator activity I've alluded to. Shell are currently drilling there in a 3-well horizontal program. There's at least $100 million being spent there. Santos have acreage to our north and south. We signed an agreement to data share over wells with them. We have a junior neighbor to our southeast who's booked a large resource and who plans more activities later this year. Now, multiple operators doing multiple things mean the more chance of cross-learnings and the code being cracked. If I add up all the work being done here by Shell in the past and by current operators, this is a $500 million play, which is significant. Next slide. So Daydream 2 is a well that we drilled last year, and we're now in the process of stimulating and flow testing. It's got multiple objectives. We targeted 500 meters of gross pay in the Permian. We beat that. We looking for multiple horizons to stimulate tight coals as well as tight sandstones, and we found them. We're now in the 6 stages of stimulation phase. We've confirmed that CO2 is low. We're evaluating liquids content. We've undertaken a lot of scientific work. We're getting R&D support from the federal government here. Contingent resources already been booked, and we will come back to those with independent certification in the months to come. We expect a material uplift based on the work done to date. We gathered data here. This is a very scalable development to 500 wells. It's just a notional amount. It could be a lot more. Next slide. So late last year, we had a welcome surprise. We got free flow of gas into the well. At our sort of depths, which are very, very deep and tight, that's never been encountered here before. We logged a lot of pay here in the tight sections. We free flowed gas from 4,200 meters, and we begged the question, is this another Perth Basin? Next slide. So we took samples from the well, we took them to a lab. We analyzed why did this deep formation flow, and we found scientific analogs with the Perth Basin, namely clay rims on the sandstones which preserve porosity in these deep depths. We confirmed the very low CO2. We discovered very high gas contents in the coals, and that led to a material uplift in our prospective resource booking. And once we flow those coals, we'll be moving that to contingent resources. Next slide. So initial flow test results from this free-flowing zone is called the Laurel Sandstone were impressive. This was conducted after a suite of defits and flowed at a stabilized rate of 1.3 million a day, a maximum rate of 2.3 million a day. The gas was dry without indications of condensate or water. We reaffirmed low CO2 again, and now we're moving into the next stage of stimulation phase. Next slide. So we believe a new play is being proven. At 4,200 meters, this is the deepest sustained natural flow of gas in Queensland, or indeed anywhere east of the Perth Basin in all of Australia. This is a pretty exciting play. Our neighbours are watching what we're doing. The industry generally is watching what we're doing, and a lot of investor interest has come in recently. Next slide. Here's a graph that indicates the sustained flow rates that I mentioned. Those are good shapes for gas. Everything is explainable. The data gathered is valid and will flow through into our updated contingent resource report and possibly reserves report in the months to come. Next slide. So here is our timeline for project delivery. At the start of this year, everything to date has gone to plan. The oil and gas industry can be tough and things can go awry. We've built in contingency for that successfully. We're now in the final stage of Daydream 2. That is stimulation and flow testing. That will follow in the balance of April and May, and results will therefore be due within weeks or thereabouts. Next slide. So in summary, the world needs a lot more gas for a lot longer, and LNG markets themselves are growing. In East Coast Australia, we have very strong pricing, a growing and imminent supply gap, and an ability to supply LNG trains, which has spare capacity. The Taroom Trough in the Southern Bowen Basin is exceptionally well located to supply those markets. Now, there's a growing need for energy security and a key role for gas in the medium term, And that's exemplified by gas buyers from the likes of Japan and South Korea wanting to buy more Australian gas and wanting to own Australian molecules upstream. The Taroom Trough is hosting a multiple operator appraisal program to date. It's one of the most active areas in Australia, featuring majors, medium-sized Australian companies, and juniors such as ourselves. An early success with a stabilized flow rate has already been achieved, and more will follow very immediately. That's it for me today on our Queensland project, and yeah, hopefully I've met my timing, and questions welcome. Thanks.
Thanks, Neil. Great presentation and clearly doing some important work there on the East Coast. Have got quite a few questions coming through, and a couple of them I'll read verbatim because there's some positive feedback here from a couple. I've got, "G'day, Neil. Thanks for you and the team's efforts to date. Can you tell us, is there one of the stimulate stages that the team are most keen to see a great result from?"
Well, it's like asking who's your favorite child. So it's a difficult question to answer. I think, to be honest, one of the probably lower flowing zones will be the coals, but because no one's ever flowed them before, that is possibly the most exciting. It can convert very significant prospective resources, start moving them into the contingent resources. It will indicate that the gas in place in the coals, which in our block alone is probably 25, 30 TCF, you get a small amount of that out, and it's a lot. And so that's very exciting. But as I say, that's the slightly favoured child, but we love all our children.
And how does Grandis rank as a new supplier to the East Coast gas market compared to potential competitors?
Well, I think a key point is a material potential competitor is now nearly finished, and that is Twiggy's been building an importing plant in New South Wales at Port Kembla. That has an ability to take a lot of gas into that state. He's invested hundreds of millions of dollars into that. Now, when that gas comes in, it will cost LNG costs plus the costs of regassing. That's a $20 gas price right there. Other competitors, exist in far north Queensland or indeed in the Northern Territory, and I wish them all the best of luck. But I also observe that they are further away, and distance comes with cost.
And just talking about prices, maybe a bit of crystal ball gazing here, but what are the expected gas prices on the East Coast?
I mean, typically they're now in the region of $12, $15, and all, I think, respected forecasters expect that to be sustained. There aren't any magical sources of low-cost gas to come onto the market. Demand has been reduced in some respects, but otherwise demand can grow, for instance, in gas-fired power stations, which in my and many others' views will be required to stabilize the grid as it has more renewables come into it.
A good question here. Are there any community issues with respect to your activities in the Taroom Trough?
I mean, this is one of the best places in Australia to have oil and gas. I think the first well in Roma was drilled probably more than 100 years ago. The Mooney oil field, which lies immediately proximus to us, have been producing since about 1960 or thereabouts. There's a lot of coal seam gas activity. There's a lot of communities here which have benefited a lot from that investment over the years. So there is acceptance over multi-generations. There are economic benefits, and accordingly, as I say, it's a really supported industry in the region. Now, we do respect the environment and those communities, and that's part of our job, but we're not facing people who've never seen what we're doing here before.
Last question. Funding. What does funding look like going forward?
I mean, we have a reasonably decent balance sheet just now. As I noted in our presentation, we have R&D support from the federal government for this well. We've got an advanced finding on that. We've got the ability to secure debt on that, and we've got a facility in place to do so. We're investigating potential partner opportunities with some pretty interesting counterparties, and we would expect some contributions on the fiscal front from any such deal in various ways. So we're feeling pretty good about this just now. Naturally, we're a non-revenue company, and we have therefore a number of avenues to pursue to deal with these matters, which we are doing so.
Great. Thanks, Neil. That's all we have time for today. There are a few further questions which I'll pass through to you so they can be answered directly with those investors and potential investors. So really appreciate the presentation. Enjoy your day.
Thank you very much.